All right, happy hour's next. I'm just kidding. Good afternoon. My name is Rolando Fernandez. I have the honor and privilege of serving as a current past president of LGHN. I was hoping to come here to Denver, Colorado, and just relax, not speak, and be a participant and learn as much as I could from the panelists. But I've been asked to step up here and do a couple of things. First and foremost, really want to thank the Honorable Mario Tertro. Thanks so much for your kind words. Really, your words from your heart. There was a lot of things that resonated with me, and the one I want to share is how you talked about when you get to that decision-making table, right? Make it bigger and bring folks to that table. And I've never heard it like that, so certainly going to put that in my thought process and do that as I continue my growth in my career. And then the second thing is really take a time out and think about why it's important to attend these conferences, right? And I know many of y'all, like myself, have been having to go up to the room and do some work or take some calls, and so we never really separate from work as we attend these conferences. And it reminds me of an experience that I had while I was serving in the military. And so I was in the Air Force for about 10 years, and I got a chance to get deployed to overseas about 4 times, 4 different deployments. And there was one deployment in Saudi Arabia where it went longer than expected. And it really got me thinking about, like, man, I think my time is up, right? I'm ready to get out of the military. You kind of forget why you're there. The job becomes really pragmatic. It's just the same thing over and over again. You miss your family, you miss your friends, and you get really focused on the task at hand, and you forget about the bigger picture. And I feel like sometimes we get that kind of sense when we do our job at our local government, right? I mean, it gets really busy. We're working a lot of hours. We get home late. We have to leave the house early to get to work. We have a lot of meetings. We have the same issues, right? Maybe council can become frustrating at times. And then you kind of forget about the big picture, right? And I remember back in the Air Force, when I came back from deployment from Saudi Arabia, I got back to base, and we were having what we call the Honor of the Sword, which is recognizing the contributions of a specific person that did some major important things in the military. And during that event, you get to dress up in your blues, and you go through several ceremonies that are traditional to the military. And it was during that event that I kind of got back that memory of why I joined the military and how I felt when I first joined the military. And it was kind of like a rebluing. Air Force is the blue color, and that experience really reminded me again about how I felt when I first joined, how I felt when I did some really incredible things in the military, and it reminded me again of the greater purpose of serving our country through the military. And I think about and I relate conferences to that experience. When you come to conferences, right, you learn, you get to network, you make new friends. And then you hear stories like we heard a little while ago and yesterday about what it really means to be a public servant, what it means to give, and then the stories of how one got to where they're at, right? Being the first to graduate from high school, being the first to go to college, being the first woman here or the first woman there of Latino, Hispanic heritage. And to me, it just makes me energized to go back to my office, right, with my teammates, and continue to do the good work that we do every day serving our customers, right, our constituents. And so my takeaway from today is that, and my hope is that you all also get reblued, right, recommitted to the craft that you do in your organization, because it can become hectic, it can become stressful, it can become mundane. But then when you come here and you hear the stories, you hear from people, you make new friends, you get excited again about the work you do and also the work you would do in the future. So that's my second takeaway. And then my third takeaway is really more about, I found how the stories that are more personal have the bigger impact on us, right? And so I feel like the people that we've had come up here, the presenters, not only during the keynotes, but also during our sessions, I just want to be thankful for them for being able to share personal stories, personal examples, because it's hard, right, to do that. And I think that's the most important thing that I take away from that is the courage to be able to share those personal touches those personal examples, and to me, those are the most significant. So I feel like we've had some really good panelists, really good keynote speakers, and so I want you to join me again and thanking for today, for this afternoon, Mr. Tetro, for his sharing of his story. So thank you again. So I don't see Darlene up here up in the audience. Darlene, there you are. So I'm going to introduce a really good friend of mine from the city of Austin. When I first started with the city of Austin, Darlene was one of the first people that I met, both professionally and personally. Darlene at that time worked in the mayor's office and was the do-it-all, be-all for the mayor at the time. And I was working in the city manager's office, and she was like my spy in the mayor's office. You know, she gave me all the insight, all the secrets. And so I really think that I was successful because Darlene and I hit it off really well. And she was like, hey, just FYI, this policy's coming over here, and you might want to be like, I'm just kidding. None of that happened. But Darlene has been amazing, an amazing friend, an amazing contact. Darlene knows everybody in the city of Austin, not only within the organization, outside the organization. She currently serves as the chapter president of the Austin Hispanic Network, and she's been doing that for a couple of years. Was on the board before that when I was the president of that organization. And when I asked Darlene, I was like, I think you should really become the president of this organization. At first she was like, no. And I think we talked about it a couple of times, and then she took up my request. And so she's done a great job of keeping the momentum going for the local chapter. And I'm glad to see her now being involved at the national level. And so I think we're going to be working together here to find somebody within the organization to continue, staying connected at the national level. And Darlene also works for Austin Energy. Darlene has been really helpful in getting some sponsorships through the electric utility at Austin for our conference. So thank you so much for that, Darlene. And Darlene now will go ahead and transition us into our culture entertainment event here this afternoon. So thank you, Darlene.
Okay, that's a surprise. I wasn't sure I was going to do this, but so if I ramble, please forgive me. So before I start, we did a film. So the next item on the program is called Cumbia, A Journey Through Time. And so, again, I had done this program, but we had to shelve it because we went into COVID and we couldn't do an in-person panel event. And so I kind of just stayed in the background. And so when Karen and we were working on the planning, and they were looking for entertainment, I said, well, I have this program that I think might work, but maybe we could film it or videotape it. And anyway, it all kind of came together. So we worked with the University of Texas Butler School of Music, and then with the local video media company, Kiko, and he'll talk about who he is and his program. And I think y'all will enjoy it. I really had fun putting it together. Film and working in the film industry is a mystery, and it took about probably 10 hours of film to do I think it's 45 or 50 minutes, and the going back and forth and the cutting and the editing. It was really interesting to learn all of that with my team and some of our volunteers that helped us put it together. So I hope you enjoy it. I love music. I think music is a central part of our culture, and it also identifies who we are. It also brings us memories of moments in time. There's still songs that make me happy, make me sad, make me remember my parents, my uncles. So enjoy. Buenos dias. Welcome. My name is Darlene. I'm with the Austin Hispanic Latino Network, and we are a group of employees dedicated to professional development. We are so excited to be here at WEPA Studios recording this program for you today. I wanted to introduce Kiko, who can tell us a little bit about the magic behind WEPA Studios.
Thank you, Darlene. My name is Kiko Villamizar, and I am a Colombian-American man who when I was growing up, my mother didn't really have money for music lessons for me, so I grew up and started a non-profit here called Casa de la Cultura, where we give music lessons to kids, and then we have a recording studio inside of the nonprofit. It's a little private recording studio, and we do video and production. It's called Wepa Estudios. It's at wepaestudios.com. That you could find it, and we're happy to have you here and to tell the story of the journey of Cumbia with you.
So let us welcome Professor Moore and Kiko, and let's start our journey.
Well, thank you very much. Bienvenidos a todos. It's my pleasure to be here today chatting with Kiko Villamizar and his Cumbia band. I've been listening to them warm up. They are amazing. My name is Robin Moore. I'm a professor of music at the University of Texas at Austin, and I offer some courses on Latin American music. I guess I was viewing my role here as providing a little framing and dialoguing about Cumbia history and everything with the band to get their perspective. I should say that Latin American music to me is amazing, both for just the spectrum of performance styles and instruments and rhythms that exist throughout the region. The diversity is amazing. And also there are so many ties to the United States in its history. Of course, we have a huge Spanish-speaking population, and a lot of the southern United States, including Texas, was actually part of Latin America, and so that dialogue is really strong through time. In terms of maybe just thinking about Latin America as a cultural space, as a musical space, again, there's so much going on that it's kind of hard to define the region in terms of an instrument or a style or a groove. I like to think of Latin America as kind of a space of encounter that was created in particular contexts as the result of colonial expansion, right? Mostly on the part of Spain and Portugal, and their dominance in the region, their control and enslavement of indigenous populations, and obviously the slave trade and the bringing of millions of Afro-descendant peoples to the region. So all of this amazing music and musical traditions derive from a context that was pretty brutal and oppressive for many centuries. It resulted in really hierarchical societies with kind of centers that involved the perpetuation of different kinds of European traditions, and then all kinds of marginal areas and peripheries with people of mixed race, indigenous groups, Afro-descendant groups playing and dancing and performing on the margins and trying to make sense of the new world that they'd been thrust into and the different European and other influences that they were suddenly exposed to. So certainly for centuries there was a total rejection of anything indigenous, anything Afro-descendant, and it's really only been since the early 20th century that we've had some kind of gradual acceptance of the kind of percussion and drums and flutes and all that you're going to have demonstrated today as a valorization of that as national heritage in the region, something to be proud of, something to really explore. And so there's so much to do to sort of make up for all that lost time and all that neglect. Maybe some of you have heard about kind of Latin America described as a region of tri-ethnic heritage. Most folks talk about indigenous elements, African-derived elements, and European-derived elements. All of those have manifest themselves in many different ways through the years. Colombia is an especially fascinating example because it has really strong indigenous traditions, and especially on the northern and western coasts, all sorts of Afro-Latin American music traditions also that are fascinating. And they've also been tremendously influential. other aspects, I guess other kind of big framing themes when we think about Latin American music, there's been a really strong trend towards urbanization and modernization. So on the one hand, you have really strong regional, rural traditions, but they're increasingly in contact and in kind of dialogue with international styles, cosmopolitan styles, pop and rock and reggaeton and hip hop and everything else. So a lot of these populations kind of have a one foot in kind of a traditional cultural space and another foot exposed to all sorts of things. And the population is definitely trying to make sense of that, and different artists and bands kind of take particular positions as a result. There's definitely an element of, again, kind of resistance and grassroots valorization on the part of a lot of bands of traditions that until recently did not receive a lot of attention. Well, in terms of cumbia specifically, these folks are the real specialists over here, and so I will defer to them. But Colombia, again, is an amazing country in terms of cultural influences. My understanding is that there were over 200 distinct indigenous languages and cultural groups, a tremendous variety of cultural forms. Maybe some of you have heard of San Basilio de Palenque. On the north coast, it was declared a UNESCO National Heritage Site, where it was founded as a maroon encampment with escaped slaves. They developed their own language, their own cultural forms, their syntax and morphology. It is fascinating. And yeah, again, there's so much to study once we kind of dive into these forgotten histories that haven't really been part of notions of Colombian heritage for a long time. The terms cumbia, cumbiamba, cumbé, again, my understanding is that they come from Bantu Congo languages primarily, and that they kind of have kind of root meanings of dance or festive occasions. The first references in written documents come from about the 18th century, and mostly associated with the black and mixed race population around Cartagena, which again was the major slave port of the country for many years. The music and dance was originally instrumental. It was often associated with patron saint festivals, often in heavily, again, Catholic societies. You know, what happened in the church and in Mass, all that was really controlled by the elites of society. But there were kind of peripheral religious events like patron saints events, and they kind of provided more, they were less policed. They provided more space for folks with other cultural orientations to provide kind of cultural input and develop their own dancing and music that the church didn't, again, regulate quite as much. So these are kind of the spaces where things called cumbia first happen. So cumbia can be used to describe very specific musical styles like gaita performance, I think, that we're going to hear shortly. But it can also be used to talk about kind of used as an umbrella term to describe all sorts of different coastal traditions, from bullerengue, mapalé, porro, puya, a zillion different traditions, all with their own fascinating rhythmic combinations and dance steps, all that. So the instrumentation of cumbia, I guess, that the band is going to demonstrate, they may be even better at talking about all this than I am, but again, it represents kind of a fascinating fusion of indigenous influences, like these gaita flutes made of a cactus cane. I think the plant is called cardón.
There's a cardón and pitaya. Pitaya is dragon fruit, and it's the center of the cactus. It's the heart of it. It's just a long cacti, or whatever.
Yeah, fascinating. So you'll see all this demonstrated. I imagine they'll talk about it, but they're created in male and female pairs. There's the macho with 2 holes that kind of plays a real constant, steady, simpler melody. And there's the hembra, the female, with 4 or 5 holes that plays very sophisticated, kind of elaborated melodies over the top. The maraca technique, fascinating. Nothing like so maracas. Yeah, it's on some level it's such a kind of basic instrument, but it's very virtuosic in its form. And whether you go to Venezuela or Puerto Rico or various places, each country kind of has its own way of doing things. What do you call this particular maraca?
Well, you add the augmentative suffix on in Spanish, and so get this right, camera and audio. It's maracon, because it's a maraca but big, so it's a maracon. And so it's made with achuira seeds inside, and this is a type of tree gourd that's not like really a vine. It's like a fruit gourd that's really thick. Yeah, and then wood for the handle.
Yeah, and so the performance technique. So you'll see Kiko, I believe, playing the macho flute and the maracon at the same time.
It's you do that as a female tells the story, like you said, with the more sophisticated melody, and so you need both hands on her to tell the story with, and with the macho you only use your left hand because there's only two holes to play, and then since you're the male element in the band, you hold the seeds, the testicles of the band.
So again, just to clarify, right, we're in talking about the history of cumbia, we're kind of going back to one well-known regional folkloric style, which we're describing as gaita here, right, and incorporates all these instruments. So all these instruments will be demonstrated, but you have a smaller drum, usually called the tambor macho or llamador, that kind of provides a constant upbeat on kind of 2 and 4, what you'd think of as the 4/4 measure. We have the larger, more conga drum-like tambor alegre that is kind of more featured improvisationally and has a real bright sound. And then the double-sided tambora, not to be confused with Dominican tambora, but yeah, fascinating kind of use of striking on the body of the drum and the heads in various combinations. So maybe it'd be best if we demonstrated this music as an example of kind of the folkloric base of kind of where cumbia comes from, one example of it, one component of it, and then we can maybe switch to discussing how the music became commercialized and kind of fused with other European instruments.
I would like to make add something, if you don't mind, to what you've said, just to be OCD about some very small nuanced things that we say. This people that founded San Basilio de Palenque were escaped Africans. They were never slaves yet, so they weren't really slaves, and they like to be remembered as not slaves yet. So there's one, and then two, cumbia is one rhythm that's in several formats, and then bullerengue is another style with other rhythms that don't have cumbia in it, and they're adjacent to each other regionally and culturally, but cumbia does not. These aren't sub cumbias, if that makes sense. Like the cumbia is one rhythm from, like you said, by Cartagena, by the Magdalena River started, and then in another region there's bullerengue, and bullerengue has its own airs or winds. They call them aires, but they're the rhythms of the genre. So bullerengue will have bullerengue sentado, chalupa, fandango de lengua. Those are the three, and then in millo with the little flute in Colombian cumbia style, you have cumbias, and then in gaita you hardly ever play cumbias. Actually, you play porros, merengues, gaitas, and pullas, and then you'll play cumbias because people started to play cumbia in this format because the rhythm is so popular that people started to request it, and then people started to write recently cumbias in this style. But I just wanted to make the very nerdy distinctions. So out of the rhythms we talked about, the first one we'll show you is a cumbia, and And the way you know the it's a different rhythm from the other ones is the drum pattern on the alegre. The alegre drum means the happy drum, and so it's called that because she's the drum, or that's the drum that speaks the most out of all the drums, and there's a lot of fills and variations. And so the pattern on that drum is the first indication of the different of what rhythm it is, but then the phrasing of the flutes and the singing and the melodies also tells you generally what it is once you know the differences. But anyway, this is a cumbia called Sabor a Gaita by Adolfo Pacheco.
Se oyeron gritos de fiesta cuando bailaba Soledad. Con ese son de tambores se hizo furor en la ciudad. Se oyeron gritos de fiesta cuando bailaba Soledad. Con ese son de tambores se hizo furor en la ciudad. Pero mi tierra envidiosa de nota triste volvió a la gaita. Y en su corpiño de rosas saltaron todos sobre la falda. Ella no es negra y morena como son todas las de mi tierra. Y en su cintura se megan los remolinos sobre la arena. Cántale Toño Fernández a copa de llamador para que sepan que es gaita, el son y tango. Cántale Toño Fernández a copa de llamador para que sepan que es gaita, el son y tango. Suénale la maraca que haga cosquillas sobre su taller. Que se descargue la esperma sobre la rueda que lleva el baile. San Jacinto recuerda los bailes nobles de tus abuelos. Los que bailaron la...
So the next rhythm we're gonna play, this is something that's a nuanced thing in gaita. Depends what town you're in, what this rhythm is called, and the town that these fellows are from. Want to introduce you. This is Damian Bocio, the lead gaita player of of Los Gaiteros de San Jacinto. They're Grammy winners in 2006. They won a Grammy with their album Fuego de Sangre Pura, and it's a band that was founded in 1940. And they're inheritors of the band, and so they play currently in it. But this is Damian Bocio from Gaiteros de San Jacinto. This is Beto Cartagena, same band, and Mr. Edwin El Indio Hernandez that used to play with them, and then Greg Goodman from San Antonio, Texas, is on Llamador over there. And these three gentlemen are in that group, Gaiteros de San Jacinto. It's Gaiteros means gaita players de San Jacinto. They're from a town called San Jacinto, and in that town, this next rhythm is a puya. My teacher is from a town called Sagun, Córdoba, and over there it's called a merengue, and some places it's called a chalupa, not like a Taco Bell, but the other, like a boat, because that's what the word chalupa means, a little canoe. But anyhow, this is one of those rhythms. Depends what elder you ask. And this is called La Ceiba. Ceiba is a type of big tropical jungle tree with very colorful leaves. This is called La Ceiba. ¿Quién escribió La Ceiba?
Toño Fernández.
Toño Fernandez is the author of this.
Esta versión es
This version, because it's like Irish jigs or something where people do versions of the song as they get handed down here. So. This next song is a song, this rhythm is a porro, is on the third of the rhythms we're going to play in gaita. And porros are traditional in the savannah near in the Montes de Maria. And my teacher, Elber Alvarez, the leader of Trapiche de Colomboy, a very well-respected gaita group in Colombia, in Sagún, Córdoba. This is his song is called Trabajo de Gaitero, and these are his gaitas he gave me. So I'm gonna try to do it with this.
All right. Well, from my perspective, the history of cumbia starts with these regional folkloric styles that are played on acoustic instruments and associated with particular communities, a lot of them near the northern coast of the country on the rim of the Caribbean and in dialogue with that culture. And a different phase starts maybe in the mid-1920s, in which various music labels and dance band leaders start to get interested in the music and start incorporating these influences into new formats and incorporating new instruments. They included groups around the accordion and the emergence of the vallenato tradition and other things. There were wind bands with a lot of brass that incorporated similar rhythms, and there were also dance bands that worked with piano and a horn section and this sort of thing. And the dance bands eventually became known as música tropical internationally. So those traditional Colombian rhythms kind of served as the basis of that genre. There were a lot of foreign influences from other parts of the Caribbean on that style, I think, and also jazz and other kinds of international popular music that influenced the emerging formats. The international popularity of Cuban son and other styles, I think, also influenced the development of the style, and you saw the incorporation of instruments like bongo and timbales and guiro and stuff from other neighboring countries. So the commercial scene in Colombia was centered around Barranquilla and Cartagena, primarily with Discos Fuentes and Discos Tropical in the 30s and 40s. And to me, one of the major artists that really kind of helped push the music into the commercial sphere was a clarinetist and band leader named Lucho Bermudez.
Yeah, he's essentially the Benny Goodman of Colombian big band. Yeah.
That's kind of how I view him too. So Colombia, I guess because of the Andes and the sort of geographical layout, it's really a divided country, right? And a lot of the folks, my understanding is that sort of folks in coastal areas or in the Pacific didn't necessarily have a lot to do with Bogota and kind of other centers. So Lucho was one person that started to kind of stylize and dress up these regional folkloric rhythms and to get folks in the capital and Medellin and all sort of interested in them, sort of creating a new national music style and a new vogue. And he had a band called the Orquesta del Caribe. He had some hits in the late 1930s like Prende la Vela and Marbella that kind of set the whole tone and got folks interested.
I love it when you say Colombian names of stuff. I love it when people take an interest that deep. That's great. Sorry.
No. So, I guess he has fascinating pieces, and we could play clips of them if you're interested. But essentially, the music is driving and danceable, and has all this sort of jazz influence, and essentially the clarinet that he's playing kind of takes the place of the gaita in the traditional ensemble. So there's that phase, and then eventually there's the rise of additional labels and orchestras that got promoted by groups in Medellin, groups like the Los Graduados and the Sonora Dinamita. And it's actually kind of those sounds, I believe, in the 60s and all that really started to migrate and get popular in Mexico and closer to the border here with Texas, and eventually kind of influenced the cumbia scene closer to home.
After the golden era, after Lucho Bermudez and that stuff became popular internationally, as they saw how Cuban music hit everywhere and they tried to do the same thing, the Gaiteros de San Jacinto, the group that these fellas are currently in the 50s, they got offered a tour of Spain by this, ¿cómo se llama el señor negro? Jaime... el que formó los gaiteros, el que...
Manuel Zapata Olivella.
This Afro-Colombian man named ¿cómo? Jaime Manuel Zapata Olivella. He lives in Harlem, and he saw the Harlem Renaissance, and he was very interested in doing this in Colombia. So he went back to Colombia, and he put together groups, and he put together the first gaita stage band. There's already gaitas for hundreds of years, gaita music, but it's the first time it was going to be like a show. And he didn't just put together them; he put together a group from the Pacific, and they played marimbas and things, and groups from the interior where they did Andean Colombian music, and took a whole show to Spain. And I don't know, and he took the original Gaiteros de San Jacinto. And I don't know what the problem was, but he had some kind of falling out with them in Spain, and he left them there, and they didn't have any money to get back, so they just kept touring all the way to China and came back to Spain. It took them 3 years to get the money to get back, and they did mechanic jobs on the way, but they just street performed their way to China and back in the 50s, and then got back, and with their campesino Spanish did all of that, and then went back. But one of the members wasn't allowed to go because he was 16 years old, Andres Landero. He was one of the founding members of Gaiteros de San Jacinto. But his mom didn't let him go, didn't give him permission, because she said he doesn't even come back for 3 days when he plays in town. So I'm not letting him go to Europe. He'll never come back. So she didn't let him go. And so instead of have his friends to play music with, he went to the mountain by himself, and he learned accordion in the style of the gaitas. And that's why Colombian accordion doesn't have polkas, chotices, and waltzes that are German and Czech rhythms like they do in this part of the world, because the German didn't really hand them the style and the way to play the accordion. He learned it by himself, imitating the flutes. He takes this idea while they're still in Europe lost, or wherever they were at the time, and he went to Monterrey, and he made cumbia sabanera, the style he created with the accordion, famous in Mexico. And that's the style that's prevalent, especially in northern Mexico, in Monclova and these little towns in northern Mexico and stuff. It's a big deal. And in Monterrey. In Monterrey, there's even a neighborhood called Colombia, and people that like Colombian sabanero cumbia are called Colombianos, and they're not Colombian, but they're just called that. And the whole neighborhood called Colombia has flags. Nobody's Colombian, but they're called that because they like that kind of sabanero cumbia. And it's a cholo thing, and there's this type of a whole underground culture surrounding it that's even different. And then in Monterrey they started to do rebajadas in the 70s, which is like chop and screw rap in Houston, where they slow it down, and they play a lot of Andres Landero tunes, specifically Wepa. Anyway, so this is a style sabanero that's like the most prevalent. Is what Mexicans, if you ask somebody that doesn't know that much about cumbia, they ask them what a cumbia is, and that's what they would say is that particular style. We got a few cumbia sabaneras we could play for you with that format too, since these are San Jacinteros like that guy. They're big about that. So if you like, we could do some of that.
Sounds great.
So this will be the sabanero style of cumbia, called sabanero because of the savannah. And vallenato is in the valley. Nato del Valle is native of the valley, and sabanero is from the savannah. And this is the Andres Landero's creation, the style. And instead of the maraca, you see I hold a guacharaca. It's called the guacharaca because it imitates a bird called the guacharaco bird. And the guacharaco bird is called a guacharaco bird because it sings like this. Guacharac. So it's an onomatopoeia on an onomatopoeia. And this is the guacharaca. It's not the only instrument that imitates birds. The gaitas originally are for bird songs. Before it was made secular, the sacred songs that native people play with these still to this day are bird songs. And so a lot of songs are about birds. Andres Landero wrote a few bird songs himself. This is actually going to be an Adolfo Pacheco song called Cuando lo negro sea bello. Bien pueda, maestro.
bring this discussion a little closer to home, then I guess we could talk about the influence of cumbia in northern Mexico and Texas a little bit more recently. I guess it was really maybe the 60s and 70s when maybe a little bit the late 50s, but mostly the 60s and 70s when the cumbia really made the rounds of Latin America in various forms. It's the moment that it got popular in Peru as chicha music, and it's the moment that it made it to Argentina. In Mexico, there were particular artists who began performing rock, like Mike Laure, who started experimenting right around sort of late 50s, 60s with cumbia. He took, for instance, vallenato standards and sort of reformulated them. A little bit later, there were individuals like Valerio Longoria in the sort of conjunto style.
Conjunto Tejano style. To make the distinction of conjunto norteño and conjunto tejano. Right.
Certainly. I guess conjunto kind of deserves its own presentation and discussion because it has a long history and it's kind of involved.
It's very rich, and we're on its soil. Yeah.
So this is a music that began originally, I guess, like cumbia, as an instrumental music, a dance style, mostly featuring polka and schottisch and this sort of thing, with folks like Narciso Martinez really foregrounded. Then eventually it became a vocal genre in the 40s and 50s and 60s with groups like the Conjunto Bernal and mainstream Tony de la Rosa, etc. So the 70s, I would say, in Conjunto was kind of a moment of experimentation, and there were various things happening. There were folks like Longoria who were incorporating bolero and cumbia, international genres, and sort of making a splash in that sense. It was the moment when Música Tejana started to emerge with synthesizers and kind of moving the music different directions.
Well, Tejano, when you say Tejano and not use the word conjunto, it originally starts in this maybe late 60s or early 70s with brass Tejano. And then in the 80s with the synthesizer new wave movement, they were like, I'm not going to spend the money on 7 dudes. I'm just going to do it on here. And a whole, artistic also directions that went into synthesizers. But that would be the second wave almost of Tejano already.
You and your musicians probably know a lot more about this than me, but I guess all I really wanted to underscore was that the rhythms have a pretty extended history in Mexico and on the border.
Everywhere it goes, it takes its own the idiosyncrasy of the people where it goes. Yeah.
And so I guess more recently then we had Selena, the emergence of techno cumbia, sort of again kind of merging the style with both synthesized sounds and kind of an international pop sound, perhaps in an effort to make South Texas music more internationally recognizable, kind of fuse it with kind of broader trends and traditions. And then sort of moving forward, Selena's brother A.B. Quintanilla and the Cumbia Kings, kind of moving things towards hip-hop and scratching and other influences. Grupo Fantasma fusing it with jazz and funk, salsa. So there's been a lot of experimentation, a lot of different directions. I'd be interested to hear kind of how you position your group vis-a-vis all those tendencies and influences.
Well, it's very interesting. So I like that you first mentioned Peru and Argentina, because as cumbia starts, cumbe is really the like you say, Bantu word. Although it sounds like a couple of other things in a couple of other languages, and really it's very debated in ethnomusicology in Colombia, the origins of this stuff, because even in West Africa things are so erased that people in West Africa still don't know what part of Africa they're from anymore a lot. But cumbia, the word is a more Creole word that starts in Colombia, and then as people hear it with all the things you mentioned between Lucho Bermudez and then the Sabanero style, and as it goes in Peru, you said chicha. So they say the word chicha means it's like the Native American corn wine or potato wine, depends who's making it. And it's all in Colombia they do chicha, in Peru they do chicha, and in Mexico it's called tepache. But that's what it is. And so in these bars called chicheras, people say cumbia amazonica and cumbia limeña were the two names of the genres, and then an American compilation dude put out a thing called chichas, but the old Peruvian guys don't like it being called that because chichero was like a bad word that rich people used to call, oh, you hang out in the chicheros. And so, but then it became the coined term of how you describe all Peruvian cumbias, and then people do call it chicha. And then it went to Argentina, like you said, and white folks from Argentina started playing it with no indigenous influence in their music and no Afro, and it's just like a whole other, but it's a working class thing that rich people look down on there. And it went in every direction, kind of like it's the reggae in Spanish to me, because it's the base for pop music. Ace of Base does a reggae song because it's like how everybody understands. And same thing in Spanish, Thalia does a cumbia because everybody understands a cumbia. And so when it went in the other direction, like you said, it went to Mexico through Lucho Bermudez and Andres Landero, and then it spread like we said through everywhere with their own idiosyncrasies. And the conjunto people, they originally, like you say, play polkas, chotices, and waltzes, German rhythms, and then they added a couple Cuban ones like bolero, which is a Congolese rhythm, right? And then cumbia gets added to that, and everywhere it goes, it takes on a little bit different form. And so the word cumbia isn't one thing anymore. Like in the beginning, I said it's a rhythm, but in Colombia, it's a rhythm. In Huichol, a cumbia sounds like a polka because they call it Huichol cumbia. In the Navajos play a cumbia. They don't even speak Spanish. They do like their own conjunto sounding cumbias. So but yeah, I think cumbia is understood in the Andes, in the deserts, in the north, in the jungles. And everybody has it because it's like you said, it's black, it's white, and it's Indian. Everybody can relate to it. And it's the most, I think, balanced mix of the three races compared to other places and musics where it's very African or very European or very indigenous. Not a lot has all three so equally. And I think that's what makes it so relatable, this journey of cumbia. To answer your question, after I talk a lot, where I put my fusion and my expression, and we call it aporte a la tradición, like what you're going to add to the tradition. I play traditional, but then what are you going to add to the tradition? And my fusion specifically, there's this new wave of Colombian musicians all over the world doing a futuristic, psychedelic sounding thing with the roots in it. And some people are using MIDI and doing electronic sounds. I don't do that because I don't know how I play instruments, but I have my effects on little pedals and a guitar, and we have a drum set and a bass, and we make it modern. And I think to me right now the most popular leading band in this type of new Colombian music happening in the world is Combo Chimbita. It's led by a woman who sings bullerengue and has a bullerengue workshop in New York called Bulla en el Barrio, and she sings in a group in Colombia. It's very popular called Tonada. It's a bullerengue group, and she has this Combo Chimbita. It's a trio of electronically minded, very hip people, and they've coined the term tropical futurism. And so I think that my band falls under that wave of what's happening in the world with cumbia.
amor llega así, de esta manera, uno no se da ni cuenta. El sauce reverdece y el guamachito florece y la soga se revienta. Cuando el amor llega así, de esa manera, uno no se da ni cuenta. El sauce reverdece y el guamacito florece y la soga se revienta. Caballo levanta bala porque está viejo y cansado. Él no se ha dado cuenta que un corazón ha pasado cuando le jalan la rienda.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's session. We certainly enjoyed being here with you, and thank you for inviting us. I want to give a special thanks to the band. I also want to give a special thanks to Kiko and to Professor Moore for joining us and taking us on this journey. And in the words of my father, dale gas.
Well, yeah, thank you for having us. It has been my life's journey to tell the story of this music and this tradition, and my elders and the youth that do this and give them a platform in the world. And so I appreciate you helping us tell this story. Cumbia is a better organizer than people with their political opinions, and so we do this. We do a festival every year to give a platform to it called the Wepa Cumbia Roots Festival. You can check that out at wepafestival.com. You can check out my original music with this band at kikovillamizar.com, our nonprofit casadelaculturaaustin.org, and our recording studio here, wepastudios.com. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. My pleasure to take part and just to see all the amazing cultural offerings here in the Austin area. So many thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This last song is also by Adolfo Pacheco, good, very popular composer in this style. This is called Teofilio el Gaitero.
Murió Teófilo el gaitero un jueves por la mañana. Murió Teófilo el gaitero un jueves por la mañana. Y un golpe de campana refleja la tristeza de mi pueblo. Y un doble de campana refleja la tristeza de mi pueblo. Ya no llorará la gaita, ya no sonará el tambor. Ya no llorará la gaita, ya no sonará el tambor. Y su ritmo se lo lleva a guardar hoy en su muerto corazón. Y su ritmo se lo lleva guardado hoy en su muerto corazón. Su gaita, su gaita. Murió Teófilo el gaitero un jueves por la mañana. Teófilo Mendoza Huite, bueno con tu gaita muda. Teófilo Mendoza Huite, bueno con tu gaita muda. Y en esa muy triste te cantan cavando tu sepultura. Y una zafra muy triste te cantan cavando tu sepultura. Ya no sonará la gaita, ya no sonará el tambor.
y'all enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with these musicians. One thing I do want to leave you with is that the pandemic and the COVID environment really devastated our that community, artists and musicians that made their livelihood doing things in public and in the entertainment space. So it takes a different mindset to kind of figure out how to bring some economic benefit to those musicians in your communities, and looking at ways to, they were so appreciative for the work, to be able to do this work for us, but also get paid for it. And for us, it was really important for us to pay them, because it is, I mean, it's value of what they're giving us to the community. So, and again, production and film, it's a life of its own, and all of the background information and all the employees that helped produce that were all, it made me realize all the touch points that this COVID environment has devastated, because it has affected a lot of people's lives in ways that we can't even imagine until it's put right there in front of you. So go back to your communities, you know, try to look at artists and musicians and continue to help them in their artistic endeavors. So thank you.